Hey, this is the Hard Truth. Tony Shaffer, powered by 6 Hour, Never Settle. I had a choice of what I carried in combat. I always carry the best. I recommend you carry the best. Carry 6 Hour, Never Settle. We are on the America Out Loud Talk Radio Network, also available on the America Out Loud Podcast Network. Check us out, Project Sentinel, projectsentinel.net.com, and we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Rumble, etc., etc., etc. And by the way, I am going to show my M11, my 6 Hour M11A1, which is one of my favorite carry weapons. I carried a very similar one in Afghanistan, which I'm going to ask our guest today about what he carried in Afghanistan. And our guest today is Pete Turner. Pete is a counterintelligence special agent. So, Pete, welcome to the Hard Truth. Pete has several years as a counterintelligence special agent, a spy. He worked in the Army, which I'm a big fan of since I'm retired from there. His countries of operations included Afghanistan, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Egypt, Germany, and Iraq, all garden spots, I might add. He is now using his extensive knowledge in geopolitics, tactical espionage, and U.S. travel to provide compelling evidence outside the typical media landscapes, which, by the way, we need a lot of outside of typical media landscapes information. So he's been very extensively schooled, experienced, and he's here to join us to talk about his experience. So, Pete, welcome to the Hard Truth.
Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate it. I know what it's like to run one of these things and to run around and try to keep up. So it just makes it work. Look, I love to talk to people that have been shot at before, and look, there's reality in that, right? And to have to deal with helping other people understand what it is to be us, and also to know like our experiences without even working in the same area, to understand what that is, to work under that kind of pressure, either in support of or as that person. It means a lot to share air with you, man. Really, right here in the veteran heart, but also out in the field. It's a different thing.
Well, I think that's what I talk about. So one of the things we're sponsored by 6 Hours. So I don't know what you guys carried in combat, but I actually carried an M11. What did you guys carry when you were in Afghanistan?
If I carried anything, I usually carried the standard 9mm. But I didn't do a lot of weapon type stuff because I had to go build trust with people. So I tried to leave my weapon on post.
That's a good point. We didn't, but I mean, not strike that. We did try to build trust, but I was always making sure that if I went into a room, I knew that if something bad happened, I was going to be able to pull myself out. So
yeah, and I'm trying to make a singular point about a very complex thing. And I will tell you this: if you are spoiling for a fight, and I've got a concealed carry 40 cal, one of my private weapons, and you're within 120 yards, you better look out, because you might think I have a tiny little pistol, but I can hit targets, man-sized targets.
No, I get it. I get it. So well, that's the part I want to talk about today is the landscape. So over the years, I'd spent a lot of time actually working tactical counterintelligence and human intelligence in the 80s. So I actually am older than you, and my career actually started as a very young second lieutenant in the battle space of Germany back in the mid 80s. Yeah. And one of the notable things I did actually pay attention to as a lieutenant, besides being kind of, I don't know, a bit snarky because I would always get in trouble, was the fact that I think Army broke the code. One of the notable things about the U.S. Army intelligence system, and I don't know if people understand this, is that the basic DNA of U.S. Army intelligence goes back to George Washington and the Continental Army. That many of the things that we still use to this day regarding source operations, how we tag things and code things, how we run operations, literally goes back to General George Washington and his personal interest in running spies. And I think it's a pretty cool legacy. What do you think on that?
It's always shocking when you think you've got something new, and then you go read a book that's super old, and you're like, oh, never mind. This stuff just goes back a long way. You're totally right about that. And just that, because a lot of our training, look, this, like, you could be told something and you trained on it, but then you go read it in a book and it's in context, and you realize, oh man, this is how this works. Like the thing I always say is, like, I've got four basic tasks. Help a commander win more, lose less, and then help the enemy lose more, win less. Right.
Right.
I didn't make that up. I got that from several different books. I'm like, that's my thing. Like, I look over the hill. All right. I take notes, right? I go into the town, I talk to people in the town. I'm just trying to find anything out that's going to advance any one of those 4 quadrants. And sometimes I get lucky and one piece of information will circle all 4 of those things. And look, I don't tell the boss what to do. I just give him the information and let him drive the machine, you know? And
I think that's
all of that goes back to Washington. All of that.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think people don't understand that the basic block and tackling of human intelligence, counterintelligence operations have not changed literally since the beginning of our army. And let's talk about that because I think so much of what happens today on the battlefield is tainted by political whims. And let me outline that a little bit because I don't want to get you in trouble. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my experience has been I started off in a very pure environment where our job was to figure out and discern the truth, the objective truth, not shaded with an opinion. And that environment required that you basically set aside your politics. You focus only on what is knowable. And what is knowable, Pete, and please tell me if you think I'm wrong, is what you can either figure out from objective reality regarding what you observe, what you can develop regarding sources who you believe through vetting and other means of verification are telling you the truth. And then essentially, once you've done that, you constantly have to verify, re-verify the information coming in because, you know, there's deception. So your job is not only to tell the truth, it's to try to figure out what the bad guys are trying to deceive you with. And that requires you to be essentially non-political, right?
I totally agree with that. And you could see when people would try to question the definition of a particular word, I'm like, hey, if we can't agree on this common word and what it means within this op order or whatever it is, you know, or what Y means or whatever. And I'm not exaggerating. Like people would say, like, we're authorized to go off camp. Well, what's off camp mean? I'm like, oh my God. Like while you figure that out, I'll be back. I'm going to go get to work because my job is to go find things out while you try to decide what we're allowed to do. Because here's the thing is all of that talk, all of that like back and forth. My job is to go do, I have unique access. I have unique rules. I'm going to, don't tell me what I'm going to do. I'm going to just go get information. And the second my information isn't valuable, tune me then. But for right now, let me go do what I go do. And not everybody's built like that. Not everybody in our field. There's like the puzzle solvers, there's the ops guys, and then there's dudes like me who can go out, and I need to be in town. And if you don't get that about me, I'll help you. I'll just be out in town, and I'll come back, I'll talk to the boss, and when the boss is like, Pete, I need you to stay on camp, then I'll stay on camp. But otherwise, I'm not going to mess with all that stuff because my job is to go do what nobody else can go do.
So let's talk about that. So one of the one of the notable features I've seen of our military is that even when it's expeditionary, and I'm doing air quotes here because the expeditionary military basically brings Burger King, the PX, and every other Western civilization amenity you can think of. And so I used to sit there at Bagram, and I was there at Bagram in the early days before they built all this stuff, and we had like a little BX, and everything was still kind of primitive. I would have to go to a porta-john, and the crack of dawn. I lived in a GP medium, and that was to me expeditionary. But no. When we move in, we start building up all these huts and buildings, and we want to basically make wherever we're at like America. And it's like, I don't know if that's wise. I don't want to get into that so much at this minute. But my point being is that the war is not won by how many barracks you can build for the troops at Bagram or somewhere else. It's really about how can you figure out and get inside of a term which some people like, some people don't, the OODA loop of the enemy. So I like the term OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. I think that is a very elegant a summary of what we have to do. So my point to you is to actually understand what's going on within the context of an adversary, any adversary. Often you have to be out amongst the environment where that adversary lives, and so hanging out at the BX, drinking non-alcoholic beer, you're not going to get a lot of intelligence there, right, Pete?
Yeah, no, and look, this is just how I do it, and you know how our field is. It's widely diverse. It's multifaceted within that diversity. So I'm talking about like muddy boots, tactical collection. My job is not to be comfortable, right? And there's people that are not. Look, I'm a physical, athletic dude. So yeah, saddle me up and let me get outside. The next guy is going to be bookish. He's terrified. If he can't go off the camp because he's paralyzed by fear, okay, great. Have him read my reports. And to go back to what you said a few minutes ago, my reports are who, where, when, why, how, what I saw, and then what I think it means, right? You're welcome to question the last part, but the top two things, that should all be facts, right? You're not allowed to question what I saw, not allowed to question what the conversation was, but the thing at the bottom, yeah, help me understand what you think all of that means, right? So that's my job, is to go out and go do those things. And so I don't need to eat at the McDonald's. So do I go eat a burger every now and then? Sure. But if I can go eat with the interpreters, I'm getting smarter. If I'm learning who's calling them on the phone, I'm getting smarter. So I'm not afforded the luxury to do those things in our field, right? I've got to go out and be amongst the people. And if I'm spending, I can't be like T. Lawrence, can't be out all the time. So you're not relevant on the camp. You have to be on the camp so that you're relevant to the staff, because the staff, the sergeant major, the commander, they won't understand you and they'll undermine your ability to work if you're not there. But you've got to find that balance. But you have to be out all the time.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because we're getting closer, and I want to talk about Afghanistan here in a minute. Yeah. But to that point, the basic techniques, tools, techniques, and procedures you and I are trained to use and are common to our field. And even though we have a diverse field, Look, Pete, I've known knuckleheads who go through the training and still couldn't recruit a wet paper bag. I mean, they literally just don't have people skills. It's like that scene in Office Space. I'm a people person. I deal with people. And it's like, I know knuckleheads like that. I could say some names and I won't. But there's other folks who, like you, have the ability to go out and talk to folks and just find things out. And it's all about, like you said, building rapport. But that skill set, the skill set we're talking about, it's not necessarily something the Army, who likes regimentation, likes things very pristine. They don't like a lot of ambiguity. And this is one of the things, this is a question for you, Pete. I don't know if you know. So back when I went through the farm, I went through Camp Perry. I have the degree up here on the wall. Yeah. One of the notable features of case officers, the CIA took the time to go out and do a global study of all case officers. And they basically were looking for a common factor. Like what is the commonality of all these very diverse people? I mean, you have some people who are eggheads who go after scientists. There's others who are very seductive. We have females in the field, and there's others who basically can, I've done everything. I was wearing a Stunts Unlimited sweatshirt this morning for an interview that I got when I was undercover as a stuntman. I've done gray arm stuff. I've tried to steal. I've stolen airplanes and stolen tanks from bad guys as a kind of a high end thief for the country. Just saying. But all these. Do you know what the one common factor was of this survey of all case officers globally? You want to guess?
I don't know. Being a sociopath? I don't know idea.
No, the thirst and acceptance of ambiguity, living in the gray.
Yeah.
So that is the commonality. Yeah. So you got to be able to deal in the gray. You got to be able to deal with ambiguity. And so my point to you is the military doesn't like ambiguity, does it?
No, come on. No, yeah. And then, I'm going to go back a few minutes to the conversation. And this took years, most of my career, to figure out, because the OODA loop's a fancy tool. But for me, I realized that it was DAOO. So decide, act, orient, observe. Decide, act, orient, observe. And that's a small difference unless you're at the pro level. Yeah. And because people often they get bound up by that planning phase. I need to get out. I need to go act. And then I need to go, okay, what happened? How did I do that? And then repeat that cycle. And then allows me to slow down, because I'm not trying to outmaneuver a jet fighter. I have to slow down to the pace of what the culture is moving at. And that allowed me to, when you're in a lot of combat, time moves differently in different situations. And if you're trying to get inside someone's loop all the time, you tend to spin up and go too fast. Americans get too fast. And so that allowed me to go, hey, my job here is to slow down and to have less ego and to have it be not at all about me. And then it would allow me to see us and go, oh man, we are all too fast. This is valuable to the commander. This is all gold to the commander. So here comes Tony, and I'm using you as an example. And he comes in and he's like, my commander doesn't care what you want, Governor. My commander wants this. And I'm like, oh no, here's a problem. Okay, that goes, and I write that down. Now that's gonna make Tony upset when the boss hears that. But the boss needs to know that so the boss can go deal with Tony, because I just hope the commander realized he was losing when Tony was out, because Tony was going crazy,
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff, that is so important. That has nothing to do with anybody blowing anybody up. It has everything to do with losing them.
So let's talk about that. So one of the shared experiences we have is Afghanistan. So my time is well documented in Operation Dark Heart. Obviously, I was working with the Tier 1 units, doing a lot of special things. Yeah. And, there's scenes in there with McChrystal, with a guy named Lloyd Austin. You may have heard of him, Yep. By the way, did you know that he's having problems with his bladder? I think, he's given in to the social pressures of the Biden administration. I think he's going through transition, Pete. I think he's not going to be Lloyd Austin. He's going to be Loretta Austin. I think he's going to be a girl. I think it's where it's going. I don't want you to comment on that because I know you still have to work, but I'm just saying, I think there's something.
I'll comment on Lloyd Austin. Look, when you have that job, you get to be criticized because you've taken on this really hard job. And 3 times in that man's time as Secretary of Defense, and I've briefed Lloyd Austin. That's not a new thing for anybody. A lot of us have. But if you stand in front of the American people and you say, I have no idea how many Americans are in that country, nor can I defend them, it's time to offer your resignation.
Yeah.
And then the boss says, Lloyd has offered me his resignation. I'm refusing it. Those words all have to happen, and then you get to keep working. But when you fail the American people, there has to be accountability, and there is not.
So so let's talk about this. So I've actually advised a number of these guys, to include Austin and McChrystal. I was their senior HUMINT guy during the surge in late 2003, and I was in a room with them, and I was fascinated by some of the complete miscalculation of the culture we're dealing with. Now, your job is to go out and understand the culture, and I get that. Yeah. But my problem is this, Pete. Those guys are not willing to actually accept that maybe the people we're dealing with see the world differently than we do. And this has been, so let me give you a quick lesson. So one of the people I was advising is a guy you probably, I don't know if you met with him or knew him, General Joseph Dunford. Joe Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He was commander of ISAF at one point. So when he was over there at ISAF, obviously I wasn't in the room with him. I was advising him from here. There was an event where at Bagram, a couple of Korans were inadvertently thrown into a fire. Basically, they were at the BCP. I don't know if they called it the BCP where you were there, the Bagram collection point. Yeah. I spent a lot of time at the BCP, and basically at some point, these guys were writing on the Quran. So they basically, they were, I guess you're not supposed to do that. That's fine. I'm not here to judge. But what happened was, there was big burn pits, which, by the way, a lot of us, I've actually got a disability from being exposed to them. The burn pits, some Afghan nationals found the Qurans in the fire. And of course, they reported it. So instead of accepting that maybe we need to look at this event through the eyes of the Afghans and of that religion, no. We instantly assumed responsibility. Oh, it's our fault. Oh my God, it's so terrible. We are so sorry. And the next thing you know, because we accepted responsibility, there's literally riots in Kabul protesting our responsibility. So, so when I was in with Joe after the fact, I was in the Pentagon when he was commandant. I said, Joe, do you think you could have handled that differently as a command? He looked at me and says, what do you mean? It's like, did you think about trying to communicate that incident in the eyes of the Islamic faith? What do you mean? It's like, you should have said, Inshallah. Apparently, those men who found the Qurans in the fire had somehow offended Allah, and this was their path to salvation. They were given an opportunity to shine in Allah. It was their task. Allah assigned them a task to save those Qurans. Inshallah. And it's like, that was their God. And it's like, did you consider maybe you ought to communicate at the level they understand, not what we would project on them? Yeah. And he sat there and looked at me like, we never thought of that. No, you never thought of it because you've never actually fundamentally looked at the situation for what it is rather than what you want it to be. So, in a situation like that, Joe, were you responsible for sticking those in the fire? Well, no. Was an American responsible? Well, we don't know. Exactly. So why do you then presume to say we're going to take responsible and apologize? The moment you take responsibility, you take ownership and you're the issue. Did you just think about the fact that maybe you could say, look, these men this was a gift from Allah. Go to their level of understanding of Allah and their understanding of religion and communicate at that level. And then it would have gone away. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. These men were tasked by Allah to do something to support their own spiritual development, and leave it at that. It's like, hey, good for them. They found it. So why do you think, Pete, that even people, and I love Joe. Joe is why do you think we have senior officers who don't understand the very culture we're trying to influence?
I can't tell you. How come our cultural training is 125 years old? I mean, we just refuse to adapt to it. I could tell you 100 other examples when we feel that, and I've written professionally on our refusal to understand. You're telling me that if I get invited by an imam or some sheikh and come to my mosque, I'm not allowed by regulation to go, you know what? I'm going to break that regulation every time.
Yeah, exactly.
Every time, because it's an honor. And when someone was talking to me about that, I'm like, what do we do about this? And the guy said, you realize that every time the Taliban burns down a school, there's a Quran in every school. And I'm like, I didn't know that. And he's like, yeah. So when they say that, you point at the Taliban and say, every time the Taliban burns down a school, and this is my buddy of mine, he's like, and he's Afghan. And he's like, and by the way, every time you guys build a school for girls, you name it the Mullah Omar School for Girls.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
Like, yeah. And, you write that up, you send it up, no one reads it,
So this is...
You can use culture to your advantage. Just like these books are courtesy of Jaysh al-Mahdi.
Yeah.
And then Jaysh al-Mahdi has to be like, no, we hate books. They have to say those words, And that's just what you do. That's how you do the info op on them.
Right. And so this is what my point is to you. It's like you are not unique. I mean, you are, but you're not. In that I think others like you, like me, have said we have to understand the culture we're trying to influence. Right. Because if you don't understand it, you're going to simply mess things up to the point of where things fall apart catastrophically. Right. I mean, that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, and the thing I always tried to do is figure out their cultural path, and if I can accomplish our goal on their path, well,
exactly.
Why wouldn't I? Like, why am I working so hard to invent something? They already have a way to do it. And if they brought a religious man in, and they're like, hey, by the way, that's code for Taliban. If they could bring a religious man in, and we could accomplish it on that path, and the Taliban's vouchsafing that path, hey, great. Who cares? And I would tell the boss and be like, yeah, we got this done and the Taliban signed off on it. All right, great. Thanks. I mean, just Taliban country, Why are we fighting that? We're getting wins. Just the small wins are wins. Just stack wins and keep going forward.
So we got about 3 minutes left in this segment. We'll continue the conversation after the break, but based on what we're talking about, and again, you and I think share this interest, we need to educate the public and the leadership on our mistakes. This was... While I think the tools, techniques, and procedures you and I are talking about are tried and true based on the George Washington intelligence concepts created during the Revolutionary War, they're still sound. The problem is, even with the best people trying to do a good job of actually creating an understanding of the battlefield, if the commanders themselves don't seek to understand, there's a real problem with that, right?
Boy, seek to understand are magic words. And if I'm George, you know what I got? I got Pete with those Hessians. And like, Pete, go get those guys hammered. And not just lucking into that, like it's set up. I guarantee you he had a dude in there. I guarantee it. Deploy Pete, because Pete can drink. And I'm going to get the commander hammered. And once the commander's drinking, everybody's drinking. And it just absolutely is what happened.
Yeah. And so, and again, I like the fact that we're talking at the tactical level, because one of the things in Darkheart that I got in a lot of trouble for is because, I was supporting a certain 3-letter agency that does, phones and stuff. I don't want to say them because they'll get really upset. They always do. But my point is, is at one point we had to do essentially an unauthorized raid on the telecommunications center in Kabul because, we knew where the information was at. And we basically did it on the spot without telling anybody because, first off, just going in and doing it sometimes gets it done. The rules were against it. But Pete, I knew I would never get approval to do what was necessary to get the intelligence information for that commander at that point in time. And it's like, we appreciate it, but you should have asked for authorizations. Like, I would have never gotten it. Yeah. I would have never gotten the authorization. So, what do you think?
I mean, sometimes you go to your Afghan partner and you're like, if I was you, this is what, because, the highest level of partnering is when your partner comes to you and says, Pete, you're my advisor. And I'm like, yes, I am. How would you do this? And then, you say something like, the Americans can't get this kind of stuff done. You want to be audacious like the Americans? This is what I would do. And you're like, that's, ask the Americans, tell them, matter of fact, order them to go do this with you and then lead the way. And then they want to do that stuff,
yeah.
And that's, get the Afghans to believe in your advice and have them ask for it and then go do something with them like that. Man, they'll talk about that for the rest of their lives.
Well, that's the point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no. So Pete, and I think that's the issue is that we have so many people who have invested. And think about, I don't want to get you. It's like we spent $1 trillion, give or take, on this war, and yet at the end of it, we fought the war 1 year at a time. It's like every year was we're at war. It's like it was new every year. It's like, how did you not actually learn lessons? And I would argue because there was such arrogance, cultural arrogance in our own military, not being willing to accept the fact that, hey, the Afghans don't see the world. One last note, we have to wrap it up for the first half. I was in a hospital up at Walter Reed, and there was a Marine kid. He was a lieutenant. He'd suffered massive wounds from an IED explosion, and he was going through daily surgeries, Pete, to get all the shrapnel out. And on one of these patrols, and by the way, he was a fan, so one of my friends said, hey, he's a big fan of yours. Would you go see him? Pete, I walked into the hospital. I saw a kid, probably 19 years old, with no arms and legs. Like, oh, God, just think of the sacrifice of these kids. So I went and saw this Marine lieutenant, and I'm sitting there with him, and he's in pain. He's, going through, and he had lost three of his Marines on that patrol. They were killed, and he survived. And we're going through and talking, and he looks at me. He says, Colonel, we're not going to win this, are we? I said, I don't know. He said, I really thought we were the good guys. And I looked at him. I said, I know we are, but they don't see us that way. They have a different view when you're running around with weapons through their countryside. And I'm not saying we weren't. I'm saying their perception of who we are is not the same as our perception. What do you say?
Yeah, the biggest thing I learned in the entire time I did all this stuff was one of the governors I was working with said, Pete, there's only room for one sword in the scabbard. And luckily the commander I work with, the colonel, he's like, all right, he's the boss. Let's do it. Let's follow his plan. But we were leaving, and we didn't have enough time to implement anything of substance into that plan. And then USAID failed him, and just failure after failure. So here we finally got the courage to follow this guy's plan, and we were too inept, and we were too gone to do it.
Yeah, well, let's pick it up on the second half of the show. We'll be right back with the second half of The Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer, sponsored by 6 Hour, Never Settle. We'll be right back. Hey, this is The Hard Truth, Part 2 with Tony Shaffer, still sponsored by 6 Hour, Never Settle. I had a choice of what I carried in combat. I always carried the best. In this case, I carried the M11, just saying. I suggest you carry the best. Carry 6 Hour, Never Settle. We're on the America Out Loud podcast network and radio network. Check us out, projectsentinel.net.com. And we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Rumble, and et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, happy Valentine's Day to our esteemed colleague, Cherie Curry, who does our theme and bumper music. She always does a great job for us. Chainsawchick.com if you want to check out some of the stuff she does. Always a great, Cherie. We love you, and we appreciate everything you do to help us and what we do to educate the public. So, and as obviously for those watching, I'm wearing a T-shirt of she and her sister, Marie. So there you go. So here we go. And we're still joined the second half of the show with Pete Turner, Army Counterintelligence. I'm a big fan of Army Counterintelligence since I used to be one myself. And Pete's been helping educate us and our audience on all the challenges, I guess, Pete, is the best way to put it, regarding the profession we've chosen to follow. And now we're joined, part 2 of the show, with the extremist Chris Cordani and the elongated from having to vacuum Elizabeth Breckenkamp. We'll leave it there. Yeah. So there you go. Hello. Well, say hello to the audience.
Chris, you're on mute. Hello.
Chris, there he is.
I'm good.
Howdy from Virginia.
Yes. Good old Virginia. And of course, elongated like Ralph Dibny. There we go.
That's right. So elongation is a good thing, especially if you're going into a black hole. You just get strung out, right?
Spaghetti.
Wow.
So
all kinds of science stuff. Okay.
So we're back with Pete. So Pete, we were just talking about kind of the knuckleheadery we have in dealing with commanders on the battlefield. And at the end, I think they finally got it. It was a little bit too late, obviously. And one of the things that I mentioned before we went to the break was the blood and treasure that I personally had to witness at Walter Reed, where, we had these young kids going out on these combat patrols, literally being blown to bits, having to go through this. And yet I think it was avoidable. What do you think?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. Do you think it was avoidable?
Yeah,
do you think we could have done something different?
One of the things, and I'll stick on the Marines for a second. They were spoiling for a fight, and I know guys that worked with them, and like, hey, I'm a targeting officer. I'm going to target someone. I don't get rated to not target people, and so they would target people. And I don't know how many times they killed the wrong person and went out and got themselves into fights. And I used to bounce, right? And if you are a bouncer that fights people, you have a bar that has fights in it. And so the same kind of rule applies. If you are trying to stabilize a government and get people to believe in that government, if you're focused on getting into combat, guess what? Nobody's going to believe in the government. It's too hard to do both of those things.
Yeah.
Either you're fighting or you're stabilizing. And the bottom line rule is when we show up, we're a net destabilizer. No matter what we try to do, we destabilize. And we hate that. We refuse to accept that reality. And so we never get to the lowest common denominator of we are destabilizing things. So how do you stabilize stuff? Sometimes you got to fight, right? Sometimes you have to fight. But until we accept that we're a net destabilizer, we can't work on solving that part of the puzzle.
So in Operation Dark Heart, I'll open this up to the other members in a second, but I want to make this comment. We were using something, Pete, called effects-based operations, EBO. Now, Jim Mattis trashed it. I have my issues with Jim. Jim was wrong about this. Jim threw out the baby with the bathwater. I could just say that, and Jim, if you're listening, you screwed up big time, but we'll talk about that separately. So regarding effects-based operations, we were at the time, and again, this is documented in Dark Heart, we were focused on 3-week cycles of effect. Are our operations, the full spectrum, everything from civil engagement to precise use of military force, being effective in stabilizing the government and helping support the institutions being successful? That is the Afghan institutions. And so what we would do, Pete, is make sure that we limited the combat operations to those only absolutely necessary and only going after key targets, not trying to pick fights. And one of the notable things is, within the context of that, it took, to your point, time. You weren't rapidly trying to go out and just knock things over. You were taking deep breaths. You were examining the battle space for what it is, not what you want it to be. And we were actually having good progress. And oh, by the way, we were limited. We had to do this because we didn't have a lot of force. In all of Afghanistan in 2003, we had like 11,000 people. It's like, it was great because you weren't tempted to turn to the gun. It's like, yeah, we don't have enough anyway. Let's focus on being smart. Let's play this as a chess game. And I would argue less is more in an environment like that, because next thing you know, people want to come in and make it a counterinsurgency. It's like, that's not our job. It's like the Afghan people know that they're not ungoverned, they're self-governed, are coming in to push upon them a central government. There's no tradition for that. I mean, Hamid Karzai was known, as you probably know, Pete, as the mayor of Kabul, even though he was the president, because most people didn't care. The Afghan people never accepted a central democracy as a premise of their governance because there was no tradition. And yet somehow we became the Praetorian Guard for Karzai. Am I being over the top here, or what do you think?
There's a couple things I want to say about that. There's also the affect with an A, the response, the emotional response to stimuli, right? We never measured that. And so we were trying to win hearts and minds, but the government needs that trust. They need that responsibility. So if you can't reliably create that affect, and I know people hate affect in that sense, but that's absolutely what you have to do. So if you can't make that farmer approach the government and say, I have a problem, how do I solve it? Then you're not creating a government, right? And so we never think in that way. Like, no, we want them to trust us. Like, no. Like, the government has to be fledgling. And if you can't make a government fledgle, then you can't get it to where it can possibly ever thrive, right? And so we missed that entire opportunity because we didn't do affects. And we would show up, we would measure something, and then we'd leave. Pete would go back a week later and say, what happened here a week ago? I couldn't find a trace of any affect at all. Has the government ever done anything? Yeah, that guy over there, he bought a goat for me, never paid for it. That is an affect. There's anger towards whatever it might be the government, and it owes money. How do we get money to this guy? And I would often follow the money. Like, we would get into a gunfight, and I'd go talk to the chief of police. How do you guys get provisions? Oh, well, we run a request and it goes up. So I would follow the request up. I'll make this story short. One of the times I did it, an American killed the request. Why? Because that guy was tied, the chief of police was tied to the Taliban. But we're in Taliban country. Just let the government work and see if those bullets will come back down when he requests it. But an American, an NCO who didn't even know this dude, killed the request. How can the government work if an American is going to stomp on a request and not provide somebody who's miles and miles and miles from the government center, right?
Right.
So these kind of things undermine everything, and that affect. Now that chief of police is like, see, I told you, none of this stuff works. Now he believes that affect is powerful. He believes his own government doesn't work, and he's in the damn government.
Yeah. Elizabeth, anything you want to ask?
It's a little bit off the side of that, not exactly referring to that, but it just made me think when I was in the Army and I was in Iraq, since I was there as a journalist, I remember doing stories about when you're in Iraq, Afghanistan, like you're talking about earlier about, you don't throw the Quran in the fire, cultural, you take all the cultural sensitivity awareness training. And I remember when I was there, when I was in Iraq, 2006, 2007, learning about the female cultural support teams and the female engagement teams. And I'm sure you know about that because it was the Marine Corps who had initiated that program. And I thought, what a cool thing to do. Because obviously, when you're in a Muslim country and you have a guy, the male soldiers, the male Marines, and they want to engage, they're not allowed to talk to the women. And I thought, what a cool idea. And so I was wondering, in all your experiences, did you ever have any kind of interaction with that? And what was your experience with that? Because I don't remember exactly when you were in.
I have probably the most professional opinion about this that you will find, and you're not going to like what I'm about to say. I have a peer-reviewed published paper. We did not take that task seriously. We did not develop professional skills in that. The commanders were never trained on how to deploy that. It was a side task. And when I talked to professional people who were anthropologists who actually what does it take to develop that capacity? Here was their professional advice. Don't. Like, how long does it take to develop that capacity to go engage women in other cultures? Just other cultures, not that culture, any culture. And they said, never. Military people will never be able to develop that culture, that capacity. So don't ever do it. It's inappropriate to ever do it. And then, this is before we left Afghanistan. So I called this person back after I left Afghanistan, and she's like, this is why you can never do it. You can never know the harm you will do. Nobody will take it seriously. And so it's absolutely inappropriate, dangerous, and you cannot do it. And so that's the answer right there is if you're going to do these things, it is unethical. And there's a thing where when we try to go out and do things, we reach a point of ethical saturation, and you take on all these things, whatever it is, farming, rule of law, female engagement. And look, I'm not in any way against women, right? What I'm against.
No, I got you what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm against doing things in a way that's going to harm people, right? So we we go to a village, we send our women out who aren't trained. I swear to God, I had this conversation. We're all in the staff room, and the commander's like, we got to do some female engagement. And the sergeant major, who's a dude, he's like, oh, we'll get Miller to do it. She's a female. Next thing you know, there's Miller and 2 other women going out, and they're engaging. And what are they doing? They're inventing the period and taking tampons out to women in an Afghan village. That is not in any way an appropriate thing. And no one in California would want that to happen. I mean, if some Afghan women showed up and said, here's how you do feminine hygiene, they have an answer for that already. But we're so disconnected from reality that we don't do what we're supposed to do. So in theory, yes. By the way, some of those female assets were there to collect intel. And again,
right, exactly.
Yeah, no credentials to do that. So that's the answer, is we don't take that stuff seriously, so we don't get to do it.
Right, because one thing I do remember about the female engagement teams was that they're all volunteers. Nobody made them do it, but it's like, hey, we want to put this. And so, yeah, I think in theory, it sounded good. Like, yeah, let's have the females speak with the females. But I hadn't even thought about that until you said that. But that makes sense, because, what if Korea comes to our country and tries to teach us how to,
right?
I don't know, do something they do in Korea?
For the black eyes and all that stuff, right? Nobody does. Nobody ever goes back, right?
Exactly. The follow-up. Yeah. How do you really make it successful? And how do you know it's successful? And I know that makes sense.
The sheikhs and says, hey, sheikhs, hey, tribal elders, we want to talk to the women and just like get a feel for what happens, because they're in charge of these women. They're the ones that have to make sure that they don't get their, there's honor killings in this culture, right?
Yeah.
And so we don't go talk to the people that are responsible for the honor killings and say, how do we appropriately do this? And then ask them. We don't start there, right?
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
Well, you bring a manual with you or something like that. Maybe they can just teach you how to go about that the right way. Just how to hold the knife in a certain direction.
Yes.
But yeah, that's what the engagement will be all about.
I have a manual. Let me hand it to you. Yeah. It's translated, it's transcribed and everything. Anyway.
Yeah.
It's very kind of you for that. But it is that time. It is that time. We're going to be getting Tony's takes here. That's right. It's always a lot of fun. Here we are. And I'm glad you're here, Pete. You're going to join us for this one. This is Tony's Takes, and it's powered by Sig Sauer. Never Settle. You saw
Never Settle.
You saw what Tony was carrying today. And if you want to check that out again, of course, you can find that on the America Out Loud Talk Radio
M11.
Network, the M11.
Yeah.
And you can also find us here on AmericaOutloud.news. And yes, we'll have our video version on YouTube a little bit later on. Well, let's get to this one. This is the big story. I'm hoping Pete will come back for this. I think he is. So let's pull him back in before I make a little move here. But the big story, of course, is Pete Mayorkas. He is gone. He's out. He's not going out quite yet. A lot of people are hoping so. Fact is, impeached does not mean such. However, by a 1-vote margin, the House Republicans did have the guts to do that. What are the chances, however, Tony, the Senate will follow through and toss him?
So it's Mayorkas misunderstood. He thought they meant impeached in like he's going to Atlanta to be part of the Peach Orchard Festival. So
Peach
impeached.
Festival.
So the secretary is just fine. He doesn't understand he's been impeached. He thinks it's all about Georgia peaches because he's a big fan of Fannie Willis. Fannie, is that her name?
Fannie Willis. Yes.
I think he's going to be impeaching her, if you know what I mean. Just saying.
Oh boy.
Ouch. Yeah, he's a peach, isn't he?
He's a peach.
Ooh,
by the way, shout out to the Kevin Spacey Lex Luthor. I think if they decide to bring back Superman, I think Mayorkas could be a better Lex Luthor than Kevin Spacey.
Oh.
No, he still couldn't beat out John Cryer. Nope, not happening. All right, here's another one. Here's one for all of you. Let's toss this one up. I'm from New York, so I thought I'd have a little fun with this one. As you know, there was that George Santos seat up for grabs.
Oh, gosh.
All right. Now, Democrat Tom Suozzi won. He beat he beat Mazi Pilip, who was a relative unknown. That thins out the slim majority in Congress. Mike Johnson, however, was unfazed. He's taking the Alfred E. Newman approach, the what me worry thing. Okay? That's his philosophy. I can see his point, but what's your take, Tony?
So I think George Santos' mistake was he didn't have a lot of gold bullion from Egyptian sources available to him to bribe his fellow members of Congress. I think that was his mistake.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Because I mean, Mendez apparently was able to spread around the wealth in the Senate because he's just fine, even though they have actually indicted him with far more evidence of corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, George Santos was a liar. He deceived people. He went about trying to basically establish a personality that wasn't his. Gee, that's like 90% of freaking Congress, for God's sake.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. Why are other people not kicked out?
But there was no conviction. That's the key. I'm not a big fan of Santos either, but there was no conviction. That's where the problem lies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
again, let's go back to Mendez for 1 second. I mean, Mendez is in the same boat, and he's not resigned, nor has the Senate moved to kick him out. And I think there's credible evidence that even John Fetterman, who is one step left of you ever notice he looks like the monster in the thing with Gene Wilder? What was that movie?
Young Frankenstein.
Yeah. Putting on the Ritz,
Oh gosh.
Did Taco help produce that, by the way?
No, I don't think so.
We should ask Taco about that. Yeah.
I think he was inspired by that particular.
He was inspired by the monster. That's right. No wonder.
That's right. I want to.
Sorry, Pete. Taco's one of our friends, by the way. They did Putting on the Ritz. So
yes, he's a cool fellow. One thing I want to say about Mazi Pilip, the woman who ran against Tom Swazi. Swazi ran a filthy campaign. I mean, he just jumped on this woman, used a partial quote from her about being against abortion. Her full quote was I'm paraphrasing it. The full quote was she is against abortion. Then the after that was personally, I wouldn't force it on anybody else. But he was trying to scare the constituents in a mostly liberal area. Mm-hmm. And again, she's a county legislator in Nassau. She did a pretty good job campaigning, but she didn't really emphasize some of the cool things she did. She was a gunner in the Israeli army for one of the paratrooper divisions. She was an Ethiopian Jew born in.
If I had known that, I would have voted for her. I would just move to New York just so I could vote for her.
She was an Ethiopian Jew born in poverty and brought to Israel, and I forget what the campaign name was, but and then she filled her obligation in the army. I mean, she was a gunner in the it was a gunner or something in the paratroopers division. I mean, and she's absolutely amazing. She has a master's degree. The woman's amazing, but never really got to put that out. She said she's a fighter, she's a mother, and tried to be appealing to the people. Didn't really show off her qualifications. So partially on her, partially on Swazi's friend's dirty campaign against her. That was a big loss.
She needs a better PR person. Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, go work for her.
I think so. I'd help her out. Are you kidding? I could make her president. There we go.
There you go.
What do you think, Pete? What do you think?
Oh my gosh. I just, I have no idea. You know what? I try to worry about my own representative and make sure that I get represented. That's honestly like where I focus my thing. And, that's hard enough to do anything. It's, I don't know. I don't have any comment on New York politics. It's just none of my business. Honestly.
That's okay. Well, you might like this one. Here we go. Okay. All right, here you go. Let's say Biden, a feeble old man who can't be prosecuted. Why did Robert Don't Call Me Ben-Hur decides to not prosecute Joe Biden over his mishandling of classified documents and in the way he described it? Was it, Tony, because he knew the DOJ would not move forward anyway and he wanted an out, playing on sympathies towards elderly people losing memory? Or was it a poke at Biden to taint his ill-advised campaign for re-election? What's your take?
Are you talking to me? Oh, you're talking to me. Oh. It's a joke, Chris.
I know. I don't drive a good.
I'm trying to be Joe Biden.
Oh,
so, did you? Huh? Did I miss my mark?
Wrong movie.
Oh my God!
I have a take on this. Can I jump in and say my take?
Yes,
please, Pete.
If I was an adversarial counterintelligence agent towards the U.S., I would have a field day. I would go to my boss. Tony, back. Hey man, I just need a little bit of money. Congress cannot protect its secrets. I'm just going to go bonkers and have a career. Tony's going to say, have all the money you want, and I'm going to set up a network because these people cannot hold themselves accountable, and they love money. That's what I'm saying about all of them. They cannot hold themselves accountable.
That's a good point. Yeah.
No, and it's good. I mean, Chris, it wasn't all bad because, I mean, I think it's cool that apparently Joe Biden can't tell the difference between mariachis and spin dancers. And there is a difference. Not much, but, there's a little bit of a difference.
Gosh.
Let's put it this way. I believe that this whole thing says more about Kamala Harris than it says about anybody else, even President Biden. Any other circumstance, Biden would be told to take a rest or given a pleasant retirement. But nobody, I don't think anybody in the nation, Democrats and Republicans alike, think this woman can do the job.
That's
Chris.
that's why
I gotta stop you right there. How do you know she's a woman? Because the Democrats don't define people as and by gender. So I'm just asking for our audience. Do you have hard proof, so to speak, or am I going to get you in trouble by asking about that?
I guess
I'm not one of her bosses.
Husband.
Yeah, I'm not one of her former bosses, so I wouldn't.
You didn't go on a cruise with her, like in the Bahamas or something? No, I'm just asking because I don't know these things. So
No, not at all.
All right.
We're getting in trouble for this one, aren't we, guys? All right.
All right, Chris. Is that it? Or we have more?
One more quick one, just for fun.
One more.
Best game show host announcer. I'm going with Johnny Olson.
Gene Rayburn all the way.
Oh, he's host. I'm talking about
the announcer. I think the announcer
from behind the scenes.
That's
right. Price is Right, but I can't think of his name.
That's the same guy, Olson, Johnny Olson.
Oh, thank you. Yes, yeah, him.
Why don't you go with host? I like hosts are better because you go through Richard Dawson and Gene Rayburn and who was the other guy? There was a bunch of announcers.
Wink Martindale. There we
Wink
go.
Martindale.
Mm-hmm.
He's still around. He's winking.
Yep, Art Fleming. Don't forget Art Fleming. Alan Ludden.
I had John Davidson on my show. He was a good game show host.
Was he?
Good guy. Yeah.
Oh, how cool.
Bob Eubanks.
Bob Eubanks.
Oh, Bobby, yeah.
Dick Clark hosted some shows.
Dick did, yeah. He was to be on the $100,000 pyramid or something, right?
Yeah.
I'm so old. I knew when it was a $10,000 pyramid.
But
that's right.
Oh gosh.
All right, so Chris, this is a question for you. Who's better, Gene Rayburn or I just mentioned him. He played what's his name on the match? No.
Kevin Spacey?
No. I just mentioned his name because he was on Hogan's Heroes.
Richard Dawson.
Dawson, yeah, Richard. Who was better, Dawson or Rayburn?
I'm going with Rayburn because he got away with more on air. Not he didn't do the kissing, but he got away with a lot more cool stuff on air.
That's true.
He had much cooler outfits too.
And Kirstie Alley was on his game show.
I miss Kirstie. Talk about it. I liked her a lot. So
Betty White was a game show host for a minute.
Was she?
Yeah, she did like a Card Sharks kind of game, and then like a thing about men, like the right men or something like that.
Well, who could ever forget Regis Philbin as a game show host, right?
Yeah.
The Reg.
I already did forget.
Speaking, Chris, not that you're like the Reg, but it's time to wrap it up like the Reg would, right?
He had cool ties. That's about it.
He did. So, well, that's it. We're another episode is in the can, so to speak, in the good can, not the bad can, right? Right, Chris?
No comment. I'm going to get in trouble for that one.
Valentine's Day, after all.
All right. So, hey, well, Pete, thanks for being a good sport, joining us to help educate our audience. I'd like to have you back to continue this discussion at some point. I'd like to join you on your show at some point if you'd like.
We're going to do it.
And then we'll go continue this conversation. Elizabeth, thank you for being here and being elongated. Don't stay away from those black holes. Don't vacuum anything that may be a black hole. Just saying, don't disturb the status of the universe. And then Chris, thank you for being here as always. And get a better suit next time. You should look more like Gene Rayburn.
It will happen next time. I'll wear the leisure suit. How about that?
Wear the leisure suit. Yeah, that's.
Anyway, so that's it for this week of The Hard Truth. We'll be back next week again. We'll see you then. Thanks for being here.